Hello my lovely crafters, this is Crafty Sue 519. Welcome to my channel. And this is Tea Tuesday. It's getting harder and harder for me to think up stories to tell you, but I decided today I would tell you about my work journey in the medical field. So, let's get started because it's a long one. When I was 14 years old, I lived with my mom. My parents divorced when I was 12, and my brother stayed living with my dad, and my mom and I moved out of the house. And she held a job, but my father refused to pay child support for me. So it was really difficult for her to support the two of us. So at 14 years old, our school, it was junior high at the time, not middle school like they call it now, had a program that if your parent signed this paper, they would place you in a job at 14. So I applied for that and got in, and my first job was with City Hall. And I hated it. Oh, it was so boring. I was a 14-year-old kid. What did I know? But it was boring to me. Filing, that's pretty much all they had me doing is filing. And I was just bored to death. Every day after school and on Saturday if I had to, or, it was awful. So I went back to the people who ran the program and I said, is it possible for me to move to the hospital? Because I knew that was one of the options. And they agreed, and I went to work in this little hospital in North Smithfield, Rhode Island called Fogarty. I believe it's a rehab facility now. It's no longer a hospital. But I loved it. Absolutely loved it. At 14, I had 5 patients every day that I had to take care of, just like the nurses. I was a nurse's aide, not a candy striper. And I take care of those people all day long. It was in the summertime. So I worked 5 days a week, sometimes on weekends, depended what my schedule was. And what I brought away from that at 14 years old was I really, really enjoyed working with elderly people. Really, really enjoyed that. And there was this little old lady, and she was in the very last room all by herself, and everybody would complain about her if they got her as a patient. And one day I came into work and I looked at my schedule, and sure enough, Mrs. Sears was on my schedule. And I was a little afraid to go down there because of all the bad stuff I heard about her. But I did, and she was a little cranky, but as I took care of her and bathed her and got her up and changed her bed and all those things you have to do, we talked a little bit, and she seemed to be a little bit better. So I said to her, I says, when I'm finished with all my patients this morning, I'll have some free time. I'll come back and visit with you. And she says, no, you won't. No, you won't. And I says, yes, I'll be back. So I went to my other 4 patients and took care of them, and I came back and I went down to the gift shop and I had bought a deck of cards, and I brought them back to her room and we played cards for like 2 hours. And she was wonderful. She would tell me stories about her life, and she was, I don't know why everybody complained. I think it was because they just never spent time with her. They just never took any time to get to know her. So from then on, Mrs. Sears was on my list of patients every day. And I was sad to see her go. She, when she left the hospital, she was very special to me. And all of these years later, let me see, 56 years later, I still remember her. And I had another patient, Mr. Bissett. He had horrendous surgery. He had something with his leg. He either broke his leg or was in a car accident. I don't remember exactly what. And he had pins in his legs, and he was in this contraption to keep his leg elevated, and poor man was stuck in that bed all the time. And we became very good friends, he and his wife and I. And in 1969, I sat in his room with him, and we watched the first astronauts land on the moon. I'll never forget that, because you never forget where you were when you watched that happen back in 1969. So I will pause and let you know I am drinking out of my beautiful butterfly cup, and I'm drinking wild sweet orange tea. So let me taste. Wow, that really is citrusy. Oh, very good, very good. At 16 years old, I got mononucleosis. I worked at the hospital full time. I was in a drum and bugle corps. We practiced every night for hours, and I think I just got exhausted. I remember I had gone to a carnival with my boyfriend at the time, and I fell asleep on the rides. And I said, what the heck is wrong with me? I'm falling asleep on rides and stuff. So the hospital did some blood work and found out I had mono. And back then, they admitted you into the hospital if you had mononucleosis. So into the hospital that I work at, I went. And I was there for a month. A month! Can you believe it? These days, they treat it like it's almost nothing. But back then, you were in the hospital in isolation. So I couldn't have visitors. The nurses, because they all knew me, because I worked there, would stand at the door and say, push a chair close to the door. And I would do that, and they would put my sheets and stuff on it and tell me to change my bed myself, because they didn't want to get all dressed up in all that garb to come into the room. I mean, they did, of course, at times, but mostly I was treated from the room door. Yeah, that was a long month. That was a real long month. So after that incident, I switched my job from being a nurse's aide to being a ward secretary. Now what this is that I sat at the desk on a certain floor of the hospital. So when people came, it was right in front of the elevators. So when people came in, nurse's station was right behind me. And people would come in and ask what room someone was in, and I would point them in the right direction. I would make announcements over the intercom. Much easier job than nurse's aide, but a little more boring. But by then, I had graduated high school, and I was trying to earn money to go to college because my mom didn't have any money, and my dad wouldn't pay for it, so I was doing the best I can. But while I had that job, one day I had gone to put gas in my car, and I owned this this old wreck of a car. I'll tell you, it was I don't know what year it was an old Rambler Ambassador. It was one of those cars that you drove into the gas station and said, fill up the oil and check the gas, please. Oh my gosh, it was an oil burner. But it was my car. It cost me $300. And I needed it so I could go to school. And while I was there, this beautiful red Mustang pulled in. And this guy got out of the car. And oh my gosh, you know when you just see someone that is so good looking that you just freeze? I froze. I absolutely froze. This guy was gorgeous. And he walked over to me and started talking to me, and I didn't know what to say. I really didn't have many boyfriends back then. I only really went out with one guy that was in the drum and bugle corps with me. At this point, I was no longer in that drum and bugle corps. But he walked over to me, he introduced himself. His name was Gene. And I can remember I had a blue ski jacket on, and he saw my tags hanging off of the zipper. And he says, "You ski?" And I said, "Well, I try." And we started talking about skiing, and one thing led to another, and he found out where I worked and all of this kind of stuff. And one night I'm sitting at work, and the elevator doors opened, and he walked off the elevator with flowers for me. Oh my gosh, I thought I was going to pass out. I mean, you could hear the nurses behind me going, "Oh my gosh, look at this guy." I mean, he was gorgeous. Gorgeous. Oh, never forget that. Never forget that. I was 18 years old. Something like that. Oh, he was something. Well, we didn't last. He was supposed to take me to my prom, and just before the prom backed out because he was a little bit older than me. I was 18, he was maybe 21 or 22, something like that. Anyhow, that didn't last. So I left the hospital. I dropped out of college. It was a bad time to go to college. I'll tell you that story someday. And at 20 years old, I started working at Hasbro Toy Factory. Oh my gosh, I hated it. I hated it so much. Well, my best friend at the time still worked at the hospital. She worked in the operating room. And she had called me and she said, the hospital is having bowling leagues and the operating room is going to have our own league. And we're short a person. Do you want to bowl? I said, "Oh, what the heck? That'll be fun." I said, "Sure, I'll bowl." So I went to the bowling alley the night that it was supposed to start. We had to pick a name. And I loved the Rolling Stones at the time. And they had an album out that was called Hot Rocks. So we named our bowling league Hot Rocks. That was funny. But the nurse that was in charge of the operating room was on our team. And one day she came to me and she said, "Are you happy at Hasbro?" And I went, "Oh, I hate it. Absolutely hate it. I am not a mill worker. I'm just not. You know, for 6 years I've been working at the hospital, and, you know, this is just bleh." And she says, "Well, how would you like to come work in the operating room?" And I jumped at the chance. I said, "Absolutely." So quit my job at Hasbro, went back to the same hospital, and I worked in the operating room and recovery room. That was interesting. And my job was, because I was not trained, I wasn't actually in the rooms when the surgeries took place, but I would set up the rooms for surgery. I would pull all the instruments for the surgery. I would clean the instruments after surgery. And while the surgeries were happening, I would watch them in the window of the operating rooms. Loved it. And I was in the operating room 3 weeks, and 1 week of the month I would be in recovery room. Oh, that was a horror show at times. Our operating room, I can't talk about any others, but our operating room was all about what nurse could hook up with what doctor. Oh my gosh. It was a regular Peyton place. And we had our own private Christmas parties, which were, I won't even go into it because, not my kind of thing. But the head nurse of the recovery room would be off flirting with doctors all the time and leave me alone in recovery. And that I did not like at all. I mean, I was fine doing vitals on patients and stuff like that. But there was a young man, I would say he was 27, had to have his tonsils out. And he started hemorrhaging. I mean, the blood was just gushing out of his mouth. He was choking. And I'm screaming for help. And nobody is coming. And thank gosh, I watch every little thing that someone does because it was also interesting to me. And the suction was right on the wall. So I just grabbed it and turned it on and put it down his throat to suction out some of this blood so he wouldn't choke. I was so mad at her. And I really let her have it. And she didn't like me at all after that. And she told the head of the operating room about it. And guess what? I got fired for it. She's the one who was wrong, but I'm the one who got fired. So I left there at about 22 years old. And from the time I got married at 22. And I worked there until I was 24 at CVS as a pharmacy technician. And I enjoyed that job. It was good. And I was pregnant with my first son. So at one point they came to me and said, "You are just too pregnant now. It's time for you to go home before you drop that baby in our store." And so I did. And for the next 6 years, I was at home because I had a baby at 24, at 26, at 28. I had 3 boys in 4 years. So I was busy. At 30, I went back to school. And I went back to school for medical assistant and office management. I really didn't want to be a medical assistant. And I really wanted to get into office management. The only reason I never became a nurse, and this is going to sound so ridiculous, was because I hated needles so much. I hated them. I didn't want to stick anybody with a needle. And that's why I never went to nursing school. That's the God's honest truth. Hated it. So I graduated from school and I got my first job at 32 running a GI practice. The doctor was from India. Oh, what a disaster area that place was. Disaster area. And he ran that office so poorly, I just couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand it. So after about a year and a half, I just told him, that's it. I'm out of here. You know, I can't do things, excuse my language, but half-ass like he wanted me to do. And I left. And I went to work for the best doctor ever. I was about 34 at the time, and his name was Dr. Sharon. And he was a general practitioner. He was a general surgeon and a gynecologist. So he was a little jack of all trades. Handsome man. At the time I started working for him, he was in his 50s. Beautiful family, 4 children. What a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful guy. Was always voted the best dressed doctor. You know, always impeccable looking. Oh, he was wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful to work for. I couldn't have asked for a better guy. And the woman who ran the office, Eleanor, and I became very good friends. She was much older than I was at the time. Almost ready for retirement, actually. And eventually she did. And I was there alone in the office for a while, and then Dr. Sharon's wife started coming in to help in the afternoons. He was only in the office in the afternoons because in the morning he was doing surgery. And Carol was a very nice person, but she wasn't very capable. And the head of the surgical department at the hospital called me, and his office manager was leaving, and he asked me if I would go work for him. And it was going to be a good raise in pay and different things. And I was skeptical because I really loved Dr. Sharon. I just love that man. And I just thought, well, this is an opportunity to be better, and maybe I should do this. So I gave my notice. And I gave him, I don't know, 2 weeks, something like that. And I think it was 3 days before my 2 weeks were up when I was going to quit my job. And it was just before summer, so I was going to stay home with my boys and spend the summer with them. And I was going to start the new job in September. And 3 days before I was to leave, Dr. Sharon walked into the office, and he looked at me and he said, "Sue, what'll it take to make you stay?" And I said, "What?" He goes, "What will it take to make you stay?" He says, "Write a list. I'll be back in half an hour." I was shocked. I said, "I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do." So I called a friend who was a manager at another office. At this point, I was the manager of this practice after Eleanor left. And we had a lot of old stuff in that office. So I wrote down things like, I want a new typewriter, I want a new copy machine, I want a $3 an hour raise. I forget. There were 10 things. There were 10 things on the list. And sure the heck, he came back a half hour later. He says, "You got the list?" And I said, "Yes." And I gave it to him, and I kind of chuckled to myself and said he's going to pass out when he sees this. And he looked at it and gave it back to me and said, "Okay, you can have everything you want." And I said, "What?" He says, "Everything you want on this list." Oh, I remember another thing I had on that list was I wanted a $1 an hour raise every year on the anniversary. And he agreed to it. And I looked at him, I said, "Are you for real?" And he goes, "Yep." So I handed the paper back to him and I said, "Sign it." And he says, "What?" And I said, "Sign it." I said, "Because if you go back on any of these, I leave." And he did. He signed it, and everything that was on that list he gave me. And started working with him in 1986. In 1991, 5 years later, on Christmas morning, he passed away. He had a heart attack at home and passed away. Oh my gosh, I felt like I lost my dad. You know, he was... I love that man. That's a tough one for me. So on unemployment I went because his wife was working with me at the time, and she said she no longer needed me, although she didn't know how to do any billing or anything for the practice. We weren't, of course, seeing patients anymore because Dr. Sharon was no longer with us. And I think she sold the practice to another doctor, and it was horrible. It was just a big mess. She handled that very, very poorly. So unemployment sent me to school to learn computers because computers were starting up at that point. And at 40 years old, I got a job with a young doctor, Dr. Amontado. He was Filipino and a neurologist in the city where the hospital was. And oh, he was a great guy. I really, really liked Dennis a lot. We got along extremely well. And he eventually started changing a lot. And there was a lot of family drama with his wife's family. His sister-in-law worked with me, and he treated her like crap. And oh, one thing led to another, and Sarah quit, and oh, Dennis's wife was calling me at home, complaining about her sister, and it just got to be too much. So in the meantime, I got divorced and met Grumpy. So I decided to move to California. So at 45 years old, I moved to California, and I got a job in Berkeley at a big cardiology practice. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Berkeley Cardiology Medical Group, something like that. And I worked in a billing department because coming from Rhode Island to California, billing was very different than what it was in Rhode Island. The insurances were different. Everything was different. So I felt I needed to learn that part of the medical field. And it was a good job. I enjoyed it. It was a little bit of a ride from where we lived to Berkeley every day. But I loved Berkeley. It's crazy. You know, it's an old hippie town. So it's, you know, UC Berkeley was right down the street from my office. Restaurants everywhere. Oh, Berkeley is phenomenal. What a great city. And I was there for 3 years when I applied for a job closer to home to manage a cardiology practice. And I got that job when I was 48, and I worked there until I was 58. And that's when I moved here to California. So I officially retired from Bay Area Cardiology, which was in Concord, California. I used to call them my foreign legion because one doctor was from Egypt, one from China, and the other from India. They were something. And the Indian doctor and the Egyptian doctor hated each other. Oh, they didn't get along. What a nightmare that place was. But I have to say, when I finally quit 10 years later, they were wonderful to me. They gave me this big send-off in a fancy hospital, in a fancy restaurant with all my employees, and the doctors bought me a beautiful necklace from Tiffany. It's a butterfly, gold butterfly necklace. And each one of them gave me an envelope with a substantial amount of money in it, which was very nice. And off I came to California. To Florida. And I haven't worked since. And this story went on way too long. But anyhow, turn it on, craft, listen to what I have to say. But that is my whole work history from the time I was 14 until I was 58 years old. Early retirement, part of the deal with Grumpy, that if I was to move to Florida, I was not to work again. I was so burnt out from my last job. You have no clue the stuff I went through at that place. But anyhow, that's it. I don't know why I felt I had to tell a story. I guess it was on my mind. And met some great people along the way. Met some not so great people along the way. Learned a lot. And I don't think I'd trade any of it for all the experiences I had through my career. No, I wouldn't. Tell you one thing, I don't put doctors on pedestals. Don't. Even when I applied for that last job and I had to interview with the Egyptian doctor who was head of the practice, and he's a meanie. And I told him that. I says, you have an MD after your name, not a GOD. And I do not put doctors on pedestals. I will treat you with as much respect as you treat me. And yeah, I'm sure his little Muslim background didn't appreciate this woman telling him that. But I don't know. Somehow or other it clicked and I got the job. So anyhow, that's it. I'm going to shut up now because I went on way too long. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. I have a lot of entries to open, so I'll be back with some of those. And I hope you have a wonderful, fantastic Tea Tuesday. Thank you, Kathy and Patti, for hosting this. I enjoy doing them. So until next time, love yous. Bye-bye.